I'm standing in front of the judge, my hands trembling on the dark wooden table. My son Darius is pointing a finger at me, as if I'm a stranger. I'm standing in front of the judge, my hands trembling on the dark wooden table. My son Darius is pointing a finger at me, as if I'm a stranger, as if I hadn't spent countless nights caring for him when he had a fever, as if I hadn't given up my own dreams so he could achieve his. This old woman just knows how to waste what she doesn't deserve, he says in a voice I don't recognize. A voice full of venom I never thought I'd hear from my own son. Judge Hayes nods slightly as he reviews the stacks of papers before him. Darius's lawyer, a woman in a sharp gray suit named Brenda Cole, who has glared at me with contempt since I walked into this courtroom, smiles like she's already won. I feel the floor shifting beneath my feet. I am 72 years old, and I never imagined I'd end up here in a court of law, facing the only child I brought into this world, listening to him demand every single penny of the fortune my husband. Clarence left me when he closed his eyes for the last time 6 months ago. But what none of them know, what not even my own son suspects, is that I am about to utter 3 words that will change everything. 3 words that will make the judge turn pale and leave Darius completely silent. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, if someone you loved with all your heart ever turned their back on you for money, then you need to hear what happened next. Because this isn't just my story. It's the story of every mother who has been judged, scorned, and forgotten by the children they raised. 6 months ago, my life was completely different. Clarence was still alive, although weak, battling the cancer that stole his strength day by day. We were happy despite everything. 45 years of marriage had taught us that true love isn't measured in good days, but in how you face the bad days together. Clarence, or Claire as I called him, was a man with working hands and a noble heart. When we got married, all he had was an old pickup truck and an impossible dream to build his own logistics and trucking company. I worked cleaning houses to help pay for fuel. We ate basic meals like rice and beans for months to save every last dime. But we did it. Through sacrifice, sleepless nights, and every drop of sweat, we built something from nothing. The company grew. 1 truck became 2, then 5, then 20. We employed 50 families. We bought this house where we raised Darius, where we celebrated every birthday, every Christmas, every major moment of our lives. Darius was our pride. We gave him everything we never had. Education at good schools, new clothes, opportunities. Claire always said he worked so hard so our son would never have to go through what we did. And Darius was a good son, caring, respectful, attentive. He would visit every week, hug me, and say, "Mom, you are my treasure." Claire and I would look at each other with those eyes only parents understand. The eyes that say, "We did it. We raised a good man." Everything changed 3 years ago. Darius met Sky Thorne at a business conference. She was elegant, well-dressed, always in high heels and expensive perfume. From the first day he brought her home, I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked at our house, as if she were appraising the value of every single thing, the way she spoke to me with that fake courtesy that hides contempt. But Darius was in love, or at least he thought he was. They married 6 months later. Claire squeezed my hand during the ceremony and whispered, "I hope we're wrong about her." I nodded, even though my heart knew we weren't. Darius's visits began to space out. First every 2 weeks, then once a month, then only for special occasions. He always had an excuse. Work mom, traffic mom, commitments with Sky's family. When he did come, Sky came with him and her eyes continued to appraise, calculate, and measure the value of every object in our home. Then Claire got sick. The diagnosis was devastating: advanced pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave us 6 months, maybe a year if we were lucky. I called Darius crying. I needed my son. I needed his father to see him before it was too late. Darius came, but Sky stayed in the car. She has hospital allergies, he explained. I didn't say anything, but Claire looked at me with those tired eyes that could still see the truth better than anyone. During those final months, I cared for Claire with every fiber of my being. I gave him his medicine, bathed him when he couldn't do it himself, read his favorite books to him, and held his hand through the nights of pain. Darius visited, but less and less often, always in a rush, always checking his watch, always with Sky waiting for him somewhere. One afternoon, 2 weeks before Claire died, my husband asked me to call his lawyer, Aisha Reed. She was an older woman, a family friend for decades. Claire was locked with her for 2 hours in our study. I waited outside, listening to the murmur of their voices through the door. When Aisha emerged, her eyes were wet. She hugged me and said, Eleanor, your husband is a wise man. Trust him, even when he's no longer here. I didn't understand what she meant, but I nodded anyway. Claire died at home in our bed, my hand holding his. His last words were, "Forgive me for what is coming, my love, but it was necessary. Protect her, Aisha." I didn't understand. I just cried and held his body until it grew cold. The funeral was crowded. 50 families who depended on the company came to say goodbye to the man who had given them work and dignity. Darius was there dressed in black with Sky by his side, wearing a wine-colored dress that seemed too elegant for a funeral. He didn't shed a single tear for the father who had given him everything. A week after the funeral, Aisha came to the house with a thick folder full of documents. I sat on the same sofa where Claire and I had watched so many movies together, where we had planned our future, where we had grown old, holding hands. "Eleanor, I need to read you Claire's will," Aisha said in a soft but firm voice. I nodded, preparing to hear what I already imagined. Everything would go to me and eventually to Darius when I was gone. But there was something else, something Claire had written in his own trembling hand on the last pages of the will. Aisha read slowly, as if every word weighed a ton. "I leave all my assets, the company, the properties, and the bank accounts in trust, managed by my wife, Eleanor Davis, until such time as she deems appropriate. My son Darius will receive his inheritance only when he demonstrates the character, honor, and respect that I tried to teach him throughout his life." I froze. "What does this mean?" I asked. Aisha closed the folder and looked me directly in the eye. "It means Claire knew something you didn't want to see. He loved Darius, but he didn't trust the people around him. This clause protects everything you two built together." There was more. A special clause that Aisha didn't read aloud that day, only telling me that it existed. There are specific conditions under which Darius would lose all rights to the inheritance forever. Claire was very clear about that. Let's hope we never have to get to that point. I told none of this to Darius when he came for the official reading of the will 3 days later. He only heard that I would manage everything and that he would receive his share at the appropriate time. I watched his face tighten. I watched Sky press her lips until they went white, but they didn't say anything that day. Not yet. I tried to get on with my life. The house felt empty without Claire. Every corner reminded me of him. His coffee mug was still in the same spot where he left it the last morning he was able to get up. His favorite shirt hung in the closet. Sometimes I would wake up at night and reach out, searching for his warmth, only to find cold sheets. Darius stopped visiting completely. When I called him, he always had an excuse. "I'm too busy, Mom. We have commitments, Mom. Next week, I promise, Mom," but next week never came. 2 months after the funeral, I received a call from Darius. "Mom, Sky and I want to invite you to dinner at our house. We need to talk about some things." My heart leaped with hope. Maybe my son finally wanted to reconnect with me. Maybe the pain of losing his father had made him reflect. I arrived at their house with a pound cake I had baked myself, Darius's favorite since he was a boy. I knocked on the door with a smile, imagining that perhaps we could be a family again. Sky opened the door. She didn't smile. "Come in," she said dryly. The house was immaculate, decorated with modern, expensive furniture. Everything was white, gray, and black, cold, lifeless, without the family photographs I always thought my son would hang on his walls. Darius was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine in his hand. "Hey, Mom," he said without getting up to hug me. I put the cake on the coffee table. No one touched it the whole night. Dinner was tense. Sky barely spoke to me. Darius ate in silence, looking at his plate as if the answers to all his questions were written in the food. I tried to make conversation. I asked about his job, his plans, how they were handling Claire's loss. "That's exactly what we want to talk about," Sky said, placing her fork down with a sharp clatter on the plate. "Claw's money." My heart started beating faster. "Money?" I asked, pretending not to understand. "Don't play dumb, Eleanor," she continued in a tone that made me feel like I was 5 years old and being scolded. "We know Claire left a considerable fortune. The company is worth millions of dollars, the properties, the bank accounts, and you have all of it." "Sky, please," Darius interjected weakly but without real conviction. She ignored him. "Darius is the only son, the rightful heir. It's not fair that you, a woman your age who never really worked, who was just a housewife, control all that money." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "I never worked," I repeated, my voice trembling. "I cleaned houses for years so Claire could buy his first truck. I raised your husband. I kept this home running while Claire built his company." That's not real work, Sky said dismissively. Anyone can clean and cook. What Claire built was thanks to his intelligence and effort, not yours. And now you, an old woman who probably doesn't even know how to use a computer, are going to waste everything he achieved. I looked at Darius, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to tell his wife she was out of line, that she was disrespecting me. But my son just stared at his wine glass, swirling it slowly between his fingers. Darius, I said, my voice breaking. Do you think the same thing? He looked up. I finally saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. It was resentment, pure and simple resentment. Mom, be reasonable, he said in a tired voice. You don't need all that money. You live alone in that huge house. You don't have any real expenses. What do you want millions of dollars for? I have plans, projects, ideas to expand the business. I can grow the company, multiply what Dad built. Your father left very clear instructions, I replied, feeling tears welling up but refusing to cry in front of them. He knew what he was doing. Sky let out a bitter laugh. Of course he knew. He knew that you manipulated him on his deathbed when he was weak and confused by the medication. You convinced him to leave everything to you. I walked out of that house, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I didn't even take the pound cake I had baked with so much love. I drove home crying so hard I could barely see the road. Sky's words echoed in my head like chimes. Parasite, manipulator, old woman who wastes money. And the worst part was that Darius hadn't said a word to defend me. My own son had allowed me to be humiliated in his own home. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed I had shared with Claire for 45 years, looking at his photograph on the nightstand. Why did you do this? I asked his smiling image. Why did you put these conditions in the will? You knew this would happen. But photographs don't answer and the dead keep their secrets forever. The following weeks were a silent hell. Darius called me once to apologize for Sky's behavior, but his words sounded hollow. Rehearsed. She was stressed, Mom. She didn't mean those things. But you have to understand our position. We need that money. We have plans, investments. You can't be so selfish as to keep everything just because Dad left it to you. Your father left it to me for a reason, I replied, feeling something hardening inside me, as if every cruel word was building a stone wall around my heart. And when the time is right, you'll receive what's due to you. Darius sighed in frustration. And when will that be? When you're 90 years old, when I'm too old to enjoy it. It's not fair, Mom. He hung up without saying goodbye. I was left holding the phone, listening to the dial tone as if it were the sound of my heart breaking again and again. I tried to distract myself by managing the company. Aisha helped me understand the numbers, the contracts, the daily operations. I discovered that Claire had been more meticulous than I imagined. Every document was perfectly organized. Every decision was backed by detailed analysis. The company wasn't just successful. It was solid as a rock. But I also discovered something disturbing. There were pending invoices in Darius's name. Loans that Claire had quietly paid off over the last 2 years. $30,000 here, $50,000 there, all with the note personal loan to Darius, confidential. My son had been borrowing money from his father, and I never knew. Why did Claire never tell me? I asked Aisha, pointing at the documents with a trembling hand. She sighed deeply. Because he knew you, Alina. He knew you would defend Darius no matter what. Claire wanted to protect you from the truth as much as he wanted to protect his company. That's why he put those clauses in the will. He saw something you didn't want to see. That night, I sat in Claire's study and reviewed every document, every email he had saved, every note he had written. And there it was, hidden among business papers, a letter addressed to me, my name written in his shaky hand from his last days. I opened it with hands that couldn't stop trembling. My dearest Eleanor, it began, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and it probably means Darius is pressuring you for the money. Forgive me for not telling you sooner, but our son has problems I tried to solve in silence. He has gambling debts, Eleanor. Big debts. For 2 years, I've been secretly paying them, hoping he would mature, that he would leave those vices behind. But every time I paid one, another one appeared. Sky knows about it. In fact, I believe she encourages it. I've investigated and found out she also has credit card debt, personal loans. They married not for love, but because they both needed money and thought I was an inexhaustible source. I had to stop because tears were preventing me from reading further. My son, my little Darius, who had been so innocent, so pure. How had he gotten to this point? I continued reading with a broken heart. I didn't tell you anything because I know how much you love our son. I know you would have sold everything. You would have mortgaged our house. You would have been left with nothing just to save him. But Eleanor, there are people who do not want to be saved. There are people who just want more and more until they destroy everything. That's why I made the will this way, to protect you, to protect what we built together, and to give Darius one last chance to show who he truly is. If he comes to you with humility, with respect, with true love, then you will know my son still exists inside that man. But if he comes with lawyers, with demands, with cruelty, then you will know we lost him a long time ago. In that case, Eleanor, show no mercy. Activate the special clause in the will. Aisha knows what to do. Protect our legacy. Protect the 50 families who depend on the company, and above all, protect yourself. I love you beyond death. Always yours, Claire. I cried for hours, holding that letter against my chest. Claire had known everything. He had seen the future with a clarity that I, blinded by a mother's love, never had. And now he had left me with an impossible decision, to believe in my son or to believe in my husband. 3 months after the funeral, while I was still processing the truth about Darius, while I was still torn between a mother's love and the reality Claire had seen, the final blow arrived. A yellow envelope delivered by a messenger. Inside was a court summons. Darius was suing me. He wasn't asking for a share of the inheritance. He wasn't suggesting a negotiation. He was demanding everything, absolutely everything: the company, the properties, the bank accounts, even the house where I had raised him. And his legal argument was devastating. I was an elderly woman, mentally incompetent, incapable of running a business, and he was the rightful heir who had been unfairly stripped of his right by a will drafted under undue influence. I sat on the living room floor with that summons in my hands and felt as if the world had stopped. My son not only wanted to take the money, he wanted to have me declared incompetent. He wanted to humiliate me publicly. He wanted to destroy me. I called Aisha immediately. She came over that same afternoon with an expression that mixed sadness and determination. I knew this would happen, she said as she sat across from me. Claire warned me. That's why we drafted the will in that specific way. Eleanor, do you remember the special clause I mentioned? I nodded weakly. It's time for you to know the full extent of it. Aisha continued, opening her briefcase and pulling out another document. Claire wrote this. If my son Darius legally attempts to take what I have left my wife, if he sues her, takes her to court, attempts to declare her incompetent, or in any way uses the law to strip her of her inheritance, then he automatically loses all right to receive any part of my estate. Not only does he lose his future inheritance, but he is explicitly excluded forever. In that case, my wife has complete authority to dispose of all assets as she deems appropriate, including full donations, sales, or any other action that protects the legacy we built together. The silence that followed Aisha's words was so profound, I could hear my own heart beating. Are you saying that if I go to that courtroom, Darius loses everything automatically? I asked, my voice barely audible. Aisha nodded slowly. Exactly. Claire knew that if your son went to the extreme of suing you, it meant there was nothing left of the man you raised. This was his way of giving you definitive proof, and it was also his way of protecting the company and everything he built. I stood up and walked to the window, looking at the garden Claire and I had planted together so many years ago. The rose bushes he pruned every spring were now growing wild without his careful hand. And what if I don't go to court? I asked without turning around. What if I just give him what he asks for? Then you would betray your husband's last will, Aisha replied firmly. And you would allow Darius and Sky to destroy in months what took you decades to build. Eleanor, I have investigated. I know why they need so much money so desperately. Your son has gambling debts for more than $200,000. Sky has credit card debts with balances totaling another $150,000. Together, they owe so much that if you give them the company, they will sell it off in pieces to pay their creditors. The 50 families who depend on those jobs will be out on the street. That information hit me like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just Darius and me. There were 50 families counting on the company continuing to operate. Parents feeding their children with those wages, mothers paying for school and medicine. Did I have the right to sacrifice all of that to save a son who clearly didn't want to be saved? I need to think, I told Aisha. She placed her hand on my shoulder gently. You have 2 weeks until the hearing. But Eleanor, you need to know one more thing. I hired a private investigator. What he discovered about Sky is disturbing. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and placed it on the table. This explains a lot. Read it when you're ready. After Aisha left, I stared at that folder for hours, not daring to open it. Part of me didn't want to know anymore. Part of me wanted to keep believing that maybe this was all a terrible misunderstanding, that my son was still in there somewhere, trapped, but not lost. Finally, when night had fully fallen, I opened the folder. What I read chilled my blood. Sky had been married before twice. Both marriages had ended after she emptied her husband's bank accounts. The first had been an older businessman, the second a successful lawyer. In both cases, the pattern was the same. She would marry, slowly take control of the finances, accumulate debt in their names, and then disappear with what she could carry before they realized it. There were photographs in the report. Sky at casinos signing large checks. Sky with a man who wasn't Darius entering expensive hotels, dates and places that corresponded to the last 6 months after Claire died. My daughter-in-law had not only manipulated my son into suing me, she was cheating on him while doing it. The question that tormented me was, should I tell Darius the truth about his wife, or let life teach him the lesson he clearly needed to learn? Claire would have known what to do. Claire always knew what to say, how to act. But Claire was gone, and I had to make this decision alone. I spent those 2 weeks in constant agony. Every time the phone rang, I expected it to be Darius calling to apologize, to say he had made a terrible mistake, that he would withdraw the lawsuit. But he never called, not once. My son had chosen his path, and that path ran straight through me as if I were an insignificant obstacle. I tried to call him myself. 3 times I dialed his number, and 3 times I hung up before it rang. What would I say? Please don't do this to me. I still love you despite everything. Your father knew this would happen, and that's why he left you out of the will. Nothing seemed right. Everything sounded desperate and weak. The 4th time I dialed, I let it ring. Sky answered. What do you want, Alina? She asked in that cold tone that was now so familiar. I need to speak to my son, I replied, trying to keep my voice firm. Your son is busy preparing for the trial. The trial where he will finally get back what rightfully belongs to him. Sky, please, I begged, hatting myself for the plea, but unable to stop it. It doesn't have to be this way. We can sit down, talk as a family. She laughed, a cruel laugh that cut me like glass. Family? You stopped being family the day you decided to steal the money that belonged to Darius. We'll see you in court, old woman, and prepare to lose everything. She hung up. I stood there holding the phone, feeling the last hopes of reconciliation vanish like smoke. There was no going back. Darius had chosen, and I would have to choose, too. The night before the hearing, I took out Claire's letter again and read it completely. This time, I didn't cry. This time, I felt something different growing inside me. It wasn't hate or vengeance. It was clarity. Claire had left me this test, knowing exactly what would happen. He had seen in Darius something I had refused to see, weakness, greed, lack of character, and he had given me the tools to protect myself. All right, my love, I said to Claire's photograph that night. I'll do what you asked. I will protect our legacy, and I will let Darius face the consequences of his decisions. I slept better that night than I had in the last 3 months. For the first time since Claire died, I felt I wasn't completely alone. He had foreseen this. He had prepared me, and now it was my turn to honor his last will. The morning of the hearing, I put on a pearl-cold dress that Claire always said made me look dignified and strong. I carefully put on my makeup, not to hide my age, but to show that a 72-year-old woman could possess all the dignity and strength in the world. I looked in the mirror and saw someone who had survived 45 years of marriage, who had built an empire from scratch alongside her husband, who had raised a son with all her love. That woman was not weak. That woman was not incompetent, and that woman was not going to let herself be destroyed without a fight. Aisha picked me up early in the car. We went over the strategy. Darius is going to try to paint you as a senile old woman who knows nothing about business. They're going to bring in false witnesses, manipulate numbers. They're going to do everything possible to make you look incompetent. And what do? I asked, feeling my nerves begin to creep up my spine. Aisha looked at me with a small smile full of determination. We let them bury themselves. We let them present their case, tell all their lies, and show exactly who they are. And when it's your turn to speak, you simply tell the truth. The truth, Claire wrote down. The truth none of them know yet. We arrived at the courthouse half an hour early. The building was imposing with tall columns and hallways that echoed with every step. I sat on a polished wooden bench waiting, feeling every minute stretch into an eternity. And then I saw them arrive. Darius walked in first, dressed in a black suit that made him look like a stranger. He wasn't the boy I had raised, the young man who used to hug me and tell me I was the best mother in the world. He was a man I didn't recognize with hard eyes and a clenched jaw. Behind him came Skye, wearing an ivorical dress and heels so high they echoed against the marble floor. She looked at me with a triumphant smile as if she had already won. His lawyer, Brenda Cole, was a tall, severe woman with black hair cut in an aggressive style, carrying an expensive leather briefcase and an expression that said she never lost a case. She introduced herself as an expert in inheritance litigation. She shook my hand with a cold, calculating grip. Darius didn't look at me even once. He walked past me as if I were invisible, as if I... She looked at me with a triumphant smile as if she had already won. His lawyer, Brenda Cole, was a tall, severe woman with black hair cut in an aggressive style, carrying an expensive leather briefcase and an expression that said she never lost a case. She introduced herself as an expert in inheritance litigation. She shook my hand with a cold, calculating grip. Darius didn't look at me even once. He walked past me as if I were invisible, as if I wasn't the woman who had carried him in her womb for 9 months, who had walked the floor with him all night when he had colic, who had sold her jewelry to pay for his college tuition. That indifference hurt more than any insult. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge entered the room. Judge Hayes was a man in his 60s with perfectly combed gray hair and gold-rimmed glasses. He had the expression of someone who had seen too many cases of families destroying each other over money. He sat down, adjusted his papers, and the hearing began. Miss Cole opened the case with a perfectly constructed narrative. She spoke of Darius as a devoted son who had been unfairly stripped of his inheritance by a will drafted under questionable circumstances. "Your Honor," she said in a clear, professional voice, "my client is the only son of the deceased, Clarence Davis. Throughout his life, he was an exemplary child. He visited his parents regularly, supported them emotionally, and was present for every important moment. I had to bite my tongue to keep from yelling that it was a lie. For the last 3 years, Darius had been absent more than present, but Aisha placed her hand on mine under the table, reminding me to wait my turn. However, Miss Cole continued, after his father's death, my client discovered that he had been almost completely excluded from the inheritance. Everything was left in the hands of Mrs. S., Eleanor Davis, a 72-year-old woman with no business experience, no formal administration education, and lacking the necessary capabilities to manage a company valued at more than $5 million. $5 million. It was the first time I had heard that figure spoken aloud. Claire and I had built something worth $5 million, starting with a single old truck, and now my son wanted to take it all. Your Honor, the lawyer pulled several documents from her briefcase. We have evidence that Mrs. Davis has been making questionable financial decisions since her husband's death. She has rejected lucrative purchase offers for the company. She has held on to properties that could be sold for significant profit, and most concerningly, she has been refusing to consult with her son, the natural heir, on any important decision. All of that was a lie. I hadn't rejected any offers because I hadn't received any. I kept the properties because they generated constant income for the company. And the reason I didn't consult with Darius was because he had never asked about the business until he knew how much money was involved. Then they called the first witness. It was a man who introduced himself as a financial consultant, someone who supposedly had worked with Claire. I had never seen him in my life. He testified that Claire had expressed concerns about my mental capacity in the last months of his life. He claimed that his wife was confused, forgot important things, and had difficulty understanding basic financial concepts. He lied brazenly under oath. Aisha immediately stood up. Objection, Your Honor. This witness never worked with Mr. Clarence Davis. He does not appear in any company documents. There are no records of payments in his name. There are no emails or correspondence proving he had any contact with the deceased. Judge Hayes frowned and looked at Ms. Cole. Do you have proof that this witness actually worked with Mr. Davis? The lawyer hesitated for a barely perceptible moment, but I saw it. He worked as an external consultant, Your Honor. Not all consultants appear on the official payroll. The judge didn't seem convinced, but allowed the testimony to continue. The supposed consultant kept lying, saying Claire had mentioned several times that he wanted Darius to take control of the company, but that I had manipulated him into changing the will. When that witness finished, they called another and then another, each with a different story, all painting me as a senile, manipulative, incapable woman. I wondered where they had found all these people willing to lie under oath. Then I remembered Darius and Sky's debts. When you owe that much money, finding people to lie for you is simply a matter of paying them. Finally, after 2 hours of false testimony, the moment I had been dreading arrived. Ms. Cole called Darius to the stand. My son walked with a steady pace, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. Then he sat down and looked at me directly for the first time all morning. His eyes were full of something that took me a moment to identify. It was resentment. Pure and simple resentment. Mr. Davis, his lawyer, began in a gentle, almost maternal voice. "Tell us about your relationship with your mother." Darius sighed as if it pained him to speak of this. "My mother was always very controlling," he said, "and every word was like a knife in my heart. Even when I was a kid, everything had to be her way. My father worked constantly, so she was the one who really ran the house. That was a lie. I had been strict when necessary, like any mother, but never controlling. I had supported every one of Darius's decisions, every dream, every plan. When my father got sick, Darius continued, and his voice took on a perfectly rehearsed tone of victimhood. She wouldn't let me be alone with him. She was always there monitoring every conversation, controlling who could visit him and when. Now I understand why. She was making sure my father changed his will in her favor." "That is not true," I yelled, unable to contain myself anymore. How dare you invent those lies about your own mother?" Judge Hayes banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order in the court. Mrs. Davis, this is your final warning. Sit down immediately or I will have you removed." Aisha forcefully pulled my arm, whispering urgently in my ear, "Alina, control yourself. This is exactly what they want. They are trying to make you look unstable. Everything had to be her way. My father worked constantly, so she was the one who really ran the house. That was a lie. I had been strict when necessary, like any mother, but never controlling. I had supported every one of Darius's decisions, every dream, every plan. When my father got sick, Darius continued, and his voice took on a perfectly rehearsed tone of victimhood. She wouldn't let me be alone with him. She was always there monitoring every conversation, controlling who could visit him and when. Now I understand why. She was making sure my father changed his will in her favor." "That is not true," I yelled, unable to contain myself anymore. How dare you invent those lies about your own mother?" Judge Hayes banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order in the court. Mrs. Davis, this is your final warning. Sit down immediately or I will have you removed." Aisha forcefully pulled my arm, whispering urgently in my ear, "Alina, control yourself. This is exactly what they want. They are trying to make you look unstable. Don't give them what they are looking for." I sat down, trembling with rage and pain. Darius looked at me with an expression that could have passed for concern if I hadn't seen the hidden satisfaction in his eyes. He was enjoying this. My son was enjoying watching me suffer. Ms. Cole perfectly exploited my outburst. "As you can see, Your Honor, Mrs. Davis displays erratic and irrational behavior. She cannot control her emotions, not even in a formal environment like this courtroom. How can we trust her to make rational decisions about millions of dollars and the future of 50 families who depend on that company?" Then Sky was called to the stand. She swore to tell the truth with one hand on the Bible, and I wondered if that Bible would burn from the contact with such falsity. She sat down with perfect posture, crossed her legs elegantly, and began her performance. "My mother-in-law has always treated me with hostility," she said in a soft, victimized voice. "Ever since the day I met Darius, I believed she couldn't accept that her son had a life of his own, a family of his own. I tried to reach out to her many times. I invited her to dinner. I called her. I sent her flowers on her birthday, but she always rejected me coldly. Lies, all lies. I had welcomed her into my home with open arms. I had tried to get to know her, to understand her, to love her like a daughter, but she had always looked at me with those calculating eyes, appraising, measuring, planning. After my father-in-law passed away, Sky continued, and now her voice adopted a tone of deep sadness. The situation worsened. Eleanor became paranoid. She accused us of only wanting the money. She screamed at us when we tried to visit her. She even threatened to call the police once if we didn't leave her property. That had happened, but she failed to mention that they arrived unannounced with a notary, demanding that I sign documents that would give them power over my bank accounts. Of course, I kicked them out. Any sane person would have. What concerns me most, Skye said, looking directly at the judge with eyes that glistened with perfectly synchronized fake tears, is that Eleanor is putting Claire's legacy at risk. He worked his whole life to build that company, and now it's in the hands of someone who knows nothing about business, who refuses to listen to advice, who is letting everything deteriorate out of sheer pride and stubbornness. Judge Hayes was taking notes as Skye spoke. I tried to read his expression, but it was impossible. He was a professional who had perfected the art of not showing what he was thinking. When Skye finished her testimony, she returned to sit next to Darius, who took her hand in a gesture of support that made me sick. Miss Cole approached the judge's bench with the confidence of victory. Your Honor, we have clearly demonstrated that Mrs. Eleanor Davis lacks the mental capacity and the necessary experience to manage an estate of this magnitude. We have shown that her behavior is erratic, that her decisions are questionable, and that she represents a real risk to the financial well-being not only of my client, but of the 50 families who depend on that company. She paused dramatically before continuing. Therefore, we request that Mrs. Davis be declared incompetent to administer the inheritance, that she be removed as executive of the will, and that all assets be immediately transferred to my client, Darius Davis, who, as the sole son and rightful heir, has the legal and moral right to receive what his father built. The judge nodded and looked toward our table. Does the defense wish to present its case? Aisha stood up slowly with the calm of someone who has an ace up her sleeve. Yes, Your Honor, and it will be brief because the truth does not need to be complicated. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone in the room could hear it. This was the moment. Aisha began in a clear voice. Your Honor, everything you have heard this morning is a carefully constructed narrative based on lies, false witnesses, and emotional manipulation. The truth is much simpler, and it is documented in the original will of Clarence Davis, a document that was drafted with full mental lucidity, certified by doctors and witnessed by public notaries. She pulled a folder from her briefcase. But before we get into the legal specifics, I would like Mrs. Eleanor Davis to share something with this court. Something her son has clearly forgotten or chosen to ignore. Eleanor, please take the stand. I stood up with shaky legs. I walked toward the stand, feeling the weight of all eyes on me. The bailiff had me swear to tell the truth. I put my hand on the Bible and swore, knowing that every word I said would be the truth, even if it hurt, even if it destroyed my son, even if it ended any possibility of reconciliation. I sat down and looked Judge Hayes directly in the eye. Your Honor, my name is Eleanor Davis. I am 72 years old. I was married to Clarence Davis for 45 years until his death 6 months ago. And I am here because my only son is suing me for money he believes belongs to him. My voice sounded firmer than I expected. Aisha had prepared me for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare me to look my son in the eye as I destroyed his lies one by one. My son says, I never worked a day in my life. That is a lie. I cleaned houses for 10 years so his father could buy his first truck. I worked in the company office for another 20 years doing the accounting, handling customers, and organizing routes. I don't have a college degree in administration. That is true. But I built this company alongside my husband, brick by brick with my own hands. I watched Darius clench his jaw. Skye was whispering something in his ear, probably telling him to stay calm. My son says I have excluded him from my life after his father's death. That is also a lie. He stopped visiting me long before that. The only times he called me in the last 6 months were to demand money. My son says I show signs of dementia, that I forget things, that I am irrational. That is completely false. I pulled a folder from my purse that Aisha had given me that morning. Here I have medical reports from the last 3 months, full cognitive exams performed by 3 different neurologists. They all certify that I have full mental capacity. My memory is perfect. My judgment is clear, and I am more than capable of making my own decisions. Judge Hayes extended his hand, and the bailiff took the documents to deliver them to him. I watched him review them carefully, his eyebrows raising slightly. These are very thorough reports, he commented. Why did you decide to have these exams done, Mrs. Davis? Because my lawyer warned me this would happen, I replied, looking directly at Darius. He told me that my son would try to declare me incompetent to steal what his father left me, so I prepared myself. I made sure I had all the necessary documentation to prove that I am perfectly sane and capable. Aisha then approached with another folder. Your Honor, we also have the company's financial statements for the last 6 months, since Mrs. Davis took complete control. The company has increased its profits by 22%. It has closed 3 important new contracts. It has improved employee working conditions and maintained zero debt. For someone supposedly incompetent, those are extraordinary results. I saw Miss Cole turn pale. Clearly, they hadn't expected us to have such complete documentation. The judge reviewed the financial statements with an increasingly interested expression. These numbers are impressive, he admitted. Mrs. Davis, how did you achieve this growth? By listening to the people who truly know the business, I replied honestly. The managers my husband trained for years, the drivers who have been with us since the beginning. I don't claim to know everything, Your Honor, but I know how to recognize talent and loyalty when I see it. And I know that my responsibility is not just to protect the money, but to protect the 50 families who depend on this company to survive. Then Aisha dropped the bombshell I had been waiting for. Your Honor, is there something the plaintiff and his lawyer do not know about Clarence Davis's will? Something that completely changes this case? She pulled out a thick document and placed it in front of the judge. This is the complete will, not the summarized version that was read after the funeral. It contains specific clauses that were never publicly disclosed. The judge took the document and began to read it. The silence in the room was so deep I could hear my own breathing. I watched the judge's eyes move line by line, and I watched his expression gradually change from neutral to surprised, and then to something that looked like respect mixed with sadness. This is extraordinary, the judge murmured, more for himself than for the court. Then he looked up and gazed directly at Darius. Mr. Davis, were you aware of this clause in your father's will? Darius looked confused. What clause, Your Honor? I read the will. Everything was left to my mother with a vague promise that I would receive my share when appropriate. There is more to it than that, the judge said in a serious voice. Much more. He looked at Aisha. Do you want to explain it, or would you prefer I read it aloud? Aisha looked at me and I nodded. It was time for the whole truth to come out. Allow me to read it, Your Honor, Aisha said, taking the document. Her voice filled the room with words that Claire had written, knowing exactly what was going to happen. Testament of Clarence Davis. Special clauses drafted 2 weeks before his death. I, Clarence Davis, being of sound mind certified by the attending doctors, establish the following. All my assets remain in a trust administered by my wife, Eleanor Davis. My son Darius is not excluded from the inheritance, but his access to it is conditional. Darius leaned forward in his seat, finally paying complete attention. The conditions are these, Aisha continued. Darius will receive his inheritance when he meets any of the following requirements. First, that he demonstrates over a minimum period of 2 years that he can maintain stable employment and live within his means without accumulating gambling debts or irresponsible loans. Second, that he shows genuine respect for his mother and acknowledges the sacrifice both parents made for him. Third, that he demonstrates real interest in the well-being of the company and its employees, not just its monetary value. Darius's face had gone from confusion to horror. But there is an additional clause, Aisha said, and her voice became sterner. A clause that Claire hoped he would never have to use, but included out of caution. And I quote verbatim. If my son Darius sues his mother, takes her to court, attempts to declare her incompetent, or in any way uses legal means to attempt to strip her of what I have left her, then he automatically and irrevocably loses all right to any part of my estate. In that case, Eleanor will have absolute authority to dispose of all assets as she deems appropriate, including full donations if she so chooses. The silence that followed was deafening. I saw the color drain from Darius's face. I saw Sky half rise from her chair in disbelief. I saw Miss Cole close her eyes, knowing she had just lost the case before it really began. No, Darius whispered. That can't be real. My father wouldn't do that. Judge Hayes held up the document. This will was drafted before 3 public notaries, 2 doctors who certified Mr. Davis's mental capacity, and it was legally registered. It is completely valid. I stood up from the stand. Then Aisha had told me this was my moment, the moment to say the 3 words that would change everything. I walked toward the center of the room, looking my son directly in the eye for the first time with absolute clarity about who he really was. I didn't inherit anything. I said in a clear, strong voice that resonated in every corner of that room. The 3 words I had rehearsed that I had been afraid to say, but that now came out with absolute certainty. Everyone looked at me, not understanding. Judge Hayes frowned. "What do you mean by that, Mrs. Davis?" I took a deep breath before continuing. "I mean exactly that, Your Honor. I didn't inherit anything. My husband didn't leave me his fortune. What my husband did was put me in charge of protecting his legacy until his son proved worthy of receiving it. I am not the owner of those $5 million. I am the guardian, the protector, and my job was to wait and see what kind of man my son would become when faced with the temptation of easy money." I saw Judge Hayes beginning to understand. I saw something in his expression change, as if he were seeing the brilliance of Claire's plan for the first time. "Your husband created a test," he said slowly. "A test of character." I nodded, feeling tears finally beginning to roll down my cheeks but not trying to stop them. Exactly. Claire knew that money changes people. He wanted to know if his son valued fortune or family more. He wanted to know if Darius would be capable of waiting, of respecting, of trusting, or if he would immediately run to the courts to take by force what his father wanted to give him with love. I turned toward Darius, who now had his head in his hands. "And now I have my answer. Now I know what you chose, son. You chose the money. You chose to believe a woman you've known for 3 years over the mother who raised you for 45. You chose to humiliate me publicly, declare me incompetent, and destroy my reputation. And because of that choice, because of bringing this case to court, you have activated the clause your father most feared having to use." Darius abruptly lifted his head, his eyes red. I didn't know if it was from rage or contained tears. "This is a setup," he shouted, standing up. "It's a cruel trap. My father set a trap for me, so I could never receive what belongs to me." His voice was breaking with every word. But I no longer felt pity for him. I only felt the terrible weight of the truth that Claire had seen long before I did. "It wasn't a trap," I said, my voice firmer than I felt inside. "It was an opportunity to prove that you had learned the values we tried to teach you. Your father loved you so much that he was willing to risk his entire legacy just to give you one last lesson about what truly matters in life. Not the money, not the power, but character, integrity, and respect." Judge Hayes banged his gavel, calling for order, because Skye had also stood up, yelling that this was all a conspiracy, that Aisha and I had falsified documents, that we had manipulated the will after Claire's death. But her voice sounded desperate, like someone watching their house of cards crumble before their eyes. "Order!" the judge roared with an authority that instantly silenced everyone. "Sit down immediately, all of you, or I will clear this courtroom." Skye and Darius slumped back into their chairs. Miss Cole had her head down, frantically reviewing papers as if she could find some legal way out of this disaster. Aisha took advantage of the moment to present more evidence. "Your Honor, is there anything else the court needs to know? Something that explains why Darius needs this money so desperately." She pulled out another folder. This one filled with documents I had reviewed weeks ago, but that still hurt every time I saw them. Over the last 3 years, Darius Davis has accumulated gambling debts totaling $243,000. We have casino records, private lender loan receipts, and bank statements showing constant withdrawals and deposits that do not correspond to any known legitimate income. Aisha placed the documents on the judge's table one by one, constructing a devastating portrait. Darius was pale as a ghost. Additionally, Aisha continued mercilessly. His wife Skythorn has credit card debts totaling $160,000. Together, they owe more than $400,000 to various creditors. Some of those creditors are not exactly legitimate banking institutions. We have identified at least 3 loans with organizations that could be described as predatory lenders with connections to criminal activities. Judge Hayes looked at the documents with an increasingly serious expression. "Are you saying the plaintiff and his wife are being pressured by criminals to pay these debts?" Aisha nodded. "Exactly, Your Honor." This lawsuit was never about hereditary rights or genuine concern for Aliner's well-being. It was a desperate attempt to get quick money to pay off dangerous debts. "That's not true," Skye shouted, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're inventing all this to make Darius look bad." Aisha turned to her with a look that could cut steel. "Would you like me to bring the lenders as witnesses? Because several of them would be delighted to testify about the overdue payments and the threats they have made." In fact, we have recordings of phone calls where they discuss exactly that. Sky fell silent, finally defeated. Darius had his head in his hands again, his shoulders shaking. I didn't know if he was crying or just trying to disappear. Part of me, that part that was still his mother, wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be all right. But the other part, the part Claire had prepared for this moment, knew he needed to see this through. "There is one last piece of evidence," Aisha said, and her voice now held a tone of genuine sadness, something Alina hadn't wanted us to present, but which I insisted on because the court needs to see the complete picture. She pulled a manila envelope from the briefcase and extracted several photographs. These are photographs taken by a private investigator over the last 3 months. They show Sky Thorne in the company of another man, not her husband, entering hotels and expensive restaurants, always paid for with credit cards in the name of both spouses. The photographs were passed from hand to hand until they reached the judge. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. There was Sky laughing with a younger man entering a luxury hotel, her hand on his back with a familiarity that left no room for doubt. The dates on the photographs corresponded to days when she had told Darius she had work meetings or family commitments. Darius finally looked up when the babe placed the photographs in front of him. I saw the exact moment his world collapsed. I watched him look at each image as his face went from disbelief to recognition, and then to utter devastation. He slowly turned toward Sky, who was now staring fixedly at the floor, defenseless. "Sky." His voice was barely a broken whisper. "What is this?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. There were no words that could explain the inexplicable, no excuses that could justify the unjustifiable. Her silence was answer enough. "Your Honor," Aisha said, regaining control of the room, "we present all this evidence not to humiliate the plaintiff, but to show the complete context of this lawsuit." Darius Davis did not come to this court because he was concerned about his mother's well-being or his father's legacy. He came because he is desperate, manipulated, and trapped in a situation he himself created with bad decisions. And instead of asking his family for help, he chose to destroy it. Judge Hayes leaned back in his chair, taking off his glasses to rub his tired eyes. He had seen many horrible family cases in his career, but even for him, this seemed particularly painful. "I need a recess," he finally announced. 30 minutes. When I return, I will give my verdict." He stood up and walked out the back door. The bailiff announced the recess, and suddenly everyone was moving. Darius remained seated, motionless, staring at the photographs as if he could change what they showed by just looking at them long enough. Sky quickly stood up and tried to leave the room, but Darius grabbed her arm. "Don't you dare leave," he said in a voice I had never heard from him before. A voice full of pain, rage, and betrayal. "You stay here and face what you did. You owe me at least that." She pulled away with a violent yank. "I don't owe you anything. You're as guilty as I am. You were the one who agreed to sue your own mother. I just gave you the push you needed." "For the money?" Darius asked. And now tears were running freely down his face. "You did all this for money. The hotels with that man, convincing me to destroy my relationship with my mother, all for money." Sky laughed a bitter, ugly laugh. "And why did you do it?" "For the love of justice. Don't be a hypocrite, Darius. We both wanted the money. The difference is that I'm at least honest about it." She then left, her heels echoing in the marble hallway like gunshots. Darius was left alone at his table, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. Miss Cole quickly gathered her things and left, too, probably already calculating how to distance herself from this disastrous case before it affected her reputation. I slowly approached Darius. Aisha tried to stop me, but I shook my head. I needed to do this. I sat down in the chair next to him where Sky had been sitting just minutes before. "Mom," he said without looking at me, his voice broken into 1,000 pieces. "I'm sorry, I am so sorry. I don't know how I got to this point. I don't know when I became this person." I placed my hand over his, the hand I had held when he took his first steps. That I had healed when he scraped his knees playing, that I had applauded in every achievement of his life. "I don't know either, son," I said. "But I know your father saw this coming long before any of us. That's why he did what he did, not to punish you, but to give you a chance to wake up before it was too late." "But now it's too late," Darius whispered. "I lost everything. The inheritance, my marriage, your respect, everything." I looked at him then. I truly looked at him, trying to find the boy he had been in the destroyed man standing before me. "You didn't lose everything," I said softly. "You're still alive. You can still change. You can still become the man your father hoped you would be. But Darius, that has to start with you. Not with money, not with inheritances, but with looking in the mirror and deciding who you want to be. He finally looked at me with red, swollen eyes. Will you ever be able to forgive me? The question broke my heart because I didn't have an easy answer. I don't know, I admitted honestly. What you did today, how you humiliated me, the lies you told about me, that doesn't easily erase. But you are my son, and that is a connection that even you couldn't completely break, even though you tried with all your might. The bailiff announced that the judge was returning. Darius and I separated, each returning to our side of the courtroom. But something had changed in those 30 minutes. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't even forgiveness. It was simply the recognition of a painful truth that we would both have to carry for the rest of our lives. Judge Hayes entered with a solemn expression. He sat down, organized his papers, and looked at all of us with the gravity of someone about to change lives forever. I have reviewed all the evidence presented. I have read the complete will of Clarence Davis multiple times, and I must say that in 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a document so meticulously designed, nor a situation so tragically predictable. He paused, letting his words sink into the room. Mr. Clarence Davis was not just a successful businessman. He was a man who deeply understood human nature. He saw the weakness in his son. And instead of simply excluding him from his inheritance, he gave him a test, an opportunity to prove that the values he tried to instill throughout his life had taken root enough to resist the temptation of easy money. The judge looked directly at Darius. Mr. Davis, you failed that test. Not only did you fail it, but you did so in the most spectacular way possible. You sued your own mother. You tried to declare her incompetent with false testimony. You publicly humiliated her with unfounded accusations, all while your wife was cheating on you, and both of you were racking up debts that you planned to pay with your family's money. Darius had lowered his head again, unable to meet the judge's gaze. Therefore, Judge Hayes continued in a voice that resonated with final authority in accordance with the specific clauses of the will of Clarence Davis. I declare that Darius Davis has irrevocably lost all right to any part of his father's estate. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be filed again, and Mrs. Eleanor Davis retains complete authority over all estate assets to dispose of them as she deems appropriate. The gavel struck the table with a sound that marked the end of everything. There were no shouts, no protests, just a heavy, definitive silence. Ms. Cole had disappeared during the recess and never returned. Skye wasn't there either. Darius was left alone in his defeat, surrounded by the consequences of every bad decision he had made in the last 3 years. I walked out of the courthouse with Aisha by my side. The sun was shining outside, a cruel contrast to the darkness of what had just happened inside. You did it, Aisha told me, putting a hand on my shoulder. You protected Claire's legacy exactly as he wanted. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. I only felt a huge void where my family once was. The following days were strange. News of the trial had leaked into the business community. Some called to congratulate me, others simply to gossip. I ignored everyone. I locked myself in the house Claire and I had built together, and for the first time in months, I allowed the grief to truly reach me. Not just the grief for my husband, but for my son. Because even though Darius was still alive, the son I knew had died sometime during those last 3 years. 2 weeks after the trial, I made a decision. I called Aisha and asked her to organize a meeting with the company's main managers and employee representatives. When everyone was gathered in the boardroom Claire had used for decades, I explained my plan. The company is worth $5 million, I began, looking at the faces of the people who had worked faithfully alongside my husband for years. And after much thought, I have decided what to do with it. I am going to create a trust that guarantees the company continues to operate, that all of you keep your jobs, and that the profits are distributed fairly among everyone who contributes to its success. I saw surprise on their faces. Additionally, I continued, I am going to donate $2 million to organizations that help people with gambling addictions and victims of financial abuse. I will do it in Claire's name because I know he would have wanted his legacy to help prevent other families from going through what we did. One of the oldest managers, a man named Mr. Wallace, who had worked with Claire since the beginning, raised his hand. And what about you, Mrs. Davis? What are you going to do with the rest? I smiled for the first time in weeks. With the rest, I'm going to live modestly, just as Claire and I always lived. I don't need mansions or luxuries. I need peace and the knowledge that I honored the last will of the man I loved for 45 years. A month after the trial, Darius showed up at my door. I hadn't spoken to him since that day in court. He looked different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, wearing simple clothes instead of his expensive suits. "Can I come in?" he asked in barely audible voice. I let him in and we sat in the same living room where we used to watch movies when he was a boy. "I divorced Sky," he said after a long silence. "Or rather, she divorced me the moment it became clear there would be no money. She disappeared with that man from the photographs. She didn't even leave a note. I didn't say anything. I simply waited for him to continue. I sold everything I owned to pay the most urgent debts. My car, my furniture, my expensive clothes, everything. And I still owe almost $100,000. Money I probably will never be able to pay back. Why are you here, Darius?" I finally asked. He looked at me with eyes that finally seemed to see reality clearly. "Because I need to tell you something. Something I should have said months ago. You were right. Dad was right. I became someone unrecognizable. I let greed. I let my own weaknesses transform me into a monster capable of destroying his own mother for money." Tears ran down his face, now genuine tears of remorse that no performance could fake. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm not here to ask for money because I know I lost that right forever. I'm here simply to tell you I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every cruel word I said in that courtroom. I'm sorry for every lie I told. I'm sorry for wasting the last lesson Dad tried to teach me." I felt something inside me begin to soften, but not completely. The pain was still too raw, the betrayal too deep. "I appreciate you coming to say this," I replied carefully. "But Darius, words are easy. True repentance is demonstrated by actions over time, not with apologies." In a moment of desperation, he nodded, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "I know. That's why I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I'm just telling you that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the man Dad hoped I would be, the man you and he deserved as a son." He stood up to leave, but before reaching the door, he turned one last time. "One more thing, Mom, thank you." I frowned, confused. "Thank you for what?" "For not giving up on Dad's testament. For being strong enough to do what he asked, even if it meant losing me. Because if you had given me that money when I demanded it, I would have ended up dead or in prison. By denying it to me, even if it doesn't seem like it now, you probably saved my life." He left then, and I was left alone again in that house full of memories. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of defeat, but the silence of resolution. Claire had been right about everything, about Darius, about Sky, about what money can do to people. And he had left me the tools to protect his legacy and perhaps unknowingly to save our son from himself. 6 months later, the company was still growing. The employees worked with renewed pride, knowing they were part of something bigger than just a business. The families who depended on those wages could sleep peacefully, and the name of Clarence Davis had become synonymous with integrity in our community. Darius got a job as a truck driver, the same job his father had done 45 years ago when he started. I saw him occasionally, always from afar, always with that expression of humble determination, someone rebuilding his life from scratch. He hadn't spoken again since that day in my living room, but I kept informed through other people. I heard he was paying off his debts little by little. I heard he had started attending meetings for people with gambling addictions. I heard he was living in a small apartment and that every penny he earned was used to pay what he owed or for basic necessities. One afternoon, while going through old photographs of Claire and me, I found one last letter he had hidden between the pages of our wedding album. It was addressed to me with instructions to open it only after everything was over. With trembling hands, I broke the seal. "My dearest Aliner," it said in his familiar handwriting, "if you are reading this, it means my plan worked, though probably at a terrible cost, to your mother's heart. I know you love Darius more than your own life. I know that protecting him was your strongest instinct. That's why I knew you needed me to make this decision for you. Not because I don't trust you, but because I know you too well. You would have sacrificed everything. You would have given every last cent to save our son, and in doing so, you would have completely destroyed him. Sometimes the greatest love is letting people face the consequences of their actions. It is the hardest thing a parent can do, but it is the only thing that can truly save them. I hope Darius understands this someday. I hope he uses the second chance we gave him. And if he doesn't, at least you'll know we tried everything possible. I love you beyond time and death. And though I am no longer there to hold your hand, I hope you feel my presence every time you make a difficult decision, because the best decisions are rarely the easy ones. Always yours, Claire. I folded the letter carefully and kept it close to my heart. Claire was right as always. The best legacy is not the money you leave. It's the character you instill, the strength you inspire, the love that stands firm even when it hurts. That night, for the first time since his death, I slept soundly. I dreamed of a young Claire with his bright smile and strong hands building something beautiful from nothing. And when I woke up, I knew with absolute certainty that I had honored his memory in the only way that truly mattered. The real legacy is not what you leave in the bank. It's what you leave in the hearts of people. And money can never buy what Darius lost that day in court. His mother's unconditional love and respect. But it can't buy what he finally gained either. The opportunity to become the man he always should have been. If you have ever been betrayed by money, if your own family has ever turned their back on you out of greed, remember this. Dignity is not inherited. It is built. And sometimes true love means saying no, even if it breaks your heart. Because only in the deepest darkness can we find the strength to become light. You know, when I look back at everything that happened, I realize love isn't always about saying yes. It's about having the courage to say no when it truly matters. Sometimes protecting the ones we love means letting them fall so they can learn to stand again. I lost a lot, but I gained peace. And I learned that forgiveness starts the moment you stop expecting an apology. Maybe that's what Claire wanted all along, for both Darius and me to find our strength in the storm. So if you're going through something similar, remember this. Dignity has no price, and peace of mind is the greatest inheritance you can give yourself. If you agree with me and liked my story, show it by giving this video a like. Let's see how many of us feel the same. I'm curious, what city and time are you listening from? Write it in the comments. If you'd like to support me on this journey, you can send a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your precious time with me. For more life stories like this, check out the other videos on my channel and subscribe. I've added 2 new stories on screen that I'm sure you'll love. Click one to start listening. Love to you all.